Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is going to be part of a new series on React. So it's all about just slowly kind of getting up to date with all the different little basics of React. We're going to focus on functional components in this tutorial series. Maybe we'll come back to class components later on down the road. But basically, on this episode, we're going to focus on just getting yourself set up. And we're going to start off with a basic build so that we can abstract away like Webpack and create React app. Just focus on sort of what the React syntax is and how it's working. So I have started a folder called Basics. In there, I have an index.html and an app.js. So we're going to put in our boilerplate for HTML. We're going to connect our code. So a script tag for our personal JavaScript file, app.js. So I want to add a defer keyword for now. We'll see if we still need that later on. Okay, so again, this is our code. And then we need the React CDN. So I'm going to head over to, close all these windows. Well, we'll need to come back to that. React CDN. And you're going to find this link here. And you search for it, and you want to copy these two script tags. And that's React. Okie dokie. Now I'm going to save so my prettier can make everything pretty. Good. And then we want to add Babel. Okay, so just to kind of understand what these things are doing, the React, we're bringing in two libraries. React, which is the actual library that does all the React stuff, like all the magic. React DOM takes all that magic, all that cool stuff that React's going to do, and actually injects it into our DOM, into our document object, so that way it's viewable in the browser. Now the thing is that React uses sort of cutting edge ES6 newer JavaScript syntax. So in that case, to make sure that you have browser compatibility, you're going to use Babel, which is going to take all that newer JavaScript code, transpile it, and turn it into older JavaScript code. So that way you get to use all the new fun syntax and program in a more fun way, but it still will run in browsers. So that's what's going to happen there. So we need to go get the Babel CDN, which we can get from, you go just look up this, just Google Babel CDN, and you should find this website, CDN.js. And you are going to copy the script tag. And we will paste that into here. But we need to tell Babel to translate our JavaScript. So what we need to do is change this to type equals, and it should be like Babel. Okay, it would be like text Babel. Okay, like that. And that basically is going to tell the browser that it needs to run, or actually, well, Babel will see this and make sure to transpile this JavaScript file before it runs. Cool. And the last thing we need to do is we need to interject a div with the ID of app. It doesn't matter really what element you put in here. You need just some sort of element in here because that's going to be our injection point. We're going to use this div to inject our React code. So the simplest way, I mean, at the end of the day, we're going to do all our components as functions. And think of your component as a piece of your UI. It can be as huge and elaborate, or it can be really small and simple. We'll do a really small and simple. You always start with a component named app. Okay, that's always your starting spot. And then all your other components will go inside app, and then other components will go inside those components. It becomes a big component tree. It all kind of trees down from app. So this is going to be a function. So I'm going to use an arrow function. So we're going to pass in something called props. Don't worry about what props is yet. We'll get to that. And what you can do is you can return something just as simple as h1 hello world. Now it's weird, like I'm just writing HTML in my JavaScript. Well, this is something that Facebook created called JSX. It's a way of kind of writing HTML-like syntax in your JavaScript. This is why Babel is important, because the browser has no idea how to handle this. It's like, what's this? Babel knows, because Babel has a plugin that allows it to read the JSX. So it sees the JSX and knows what to do with it. It translates it into like sort of the functions that React is actually running under the hood. So that way, instead of you having to run all those React functions manually in a lot less fun way, you could just write like this, like normal HTML, and it'll just magically work. And it just feels really nice. So that's sort of the benefit there. But I've created a component, but why would this component appear in my DOM? I don't know. I need to inject it in there. So that's why we had to bring in that React DOM library. That was the second script tag from React. So that we can run this render function. This render function takes something and renders it to our DOM. We want to render our app component. So anytime you make a component, the syntax for that component is always like this. It's like a closed HTML tag. And then, so that's what we're going to render. And the question is where we're going to render it. We're going to render it where that div was. So document.getElementById, and that ID was called app. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. So now let's see if that works. So I'm going to open this up with live server. Give it a second, and there you go. See hello world. Now where did that hello world come from? Because that wasn't in my HTML. Okay, what happens is that React, Babel reads our code here in this app.js, translates it, and then React then does its thing. Okay, cool. But that's not very exciting. All that just for hello world. We want to do more stuff. So let's start showing you the cool things that React can do. So let's make this a more full-fledged function, because right now I'm using an implicit return. I'm just saying, hey, return the h1, returning a JSX. And think of JSX as a data type. A JSX expression is literally something you can save in a variable. Okay, like for example, let's use some curly brackets so that way this is a more full-fledged function. Okay, and let's say I did this. Okay, let me just put some enters here so that this is all nice like that. And then instead of returning hello world, what we're going to do is I'm going to save this in a variable. Const hw equals this JSX expression. And then what I'm going to do is then I'm going to return hw. Okay, and now that should still give me the same result. Because at the end of the day, it's this is this. And whatever is returned by the component is what gets rendered. So really what app is showing on the screen is the return value of the app function. Everything else is just stuff to help that function out. Cool, hello world. So that's one way I could do it. And let's make it even more exciting. In your JSX, you can actually interpolate variables that are in that component. So let's say I created a variable, const hw2, and this is actually going to be the string hello world. Okay, so instead of returning this variable equaling h1, it's going to represent an h1 in which we interpolate the hello world 2 variable. Okay, and what that does, it takes this text, slams it in there, and then we're saving this expression into this variable and then returning it. Okay, this is kind of a lot of steps for something really simple, but see, it still works. Okay, I refresh it, it still works. Okay. The point is to show you that you can do this. JSX is just an expression. You can save it in variables and play around with it. You can interpolate data into it using curly brackets. So any data that's in that function, I can't use anything outside of the function. That's the thing about React. Everything's encapsulated. Everything's inside. There's a particular flow of data, and that's sort of the art of React. Okay. So let's simplify this. Let's get rid of these 2 lines. Well, actually, yeah, let's get rid of these 2 lines. And just say we're going to return h1 hello world. Okay. And it works. But let's say I want to do this. Next to that, below that, I want to do an h2 that says cheese. Let's see what happens. Okay, you already can see it's trying to give me an error here. See, now it errors out. Now React has really good errors, so we want to check our console window to see what the errors are. Okay, and it'll tell us, see, adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So notice that neither of these tags are a child of another. They're 2 equal level tags. You can't do that, okay? That's just one of the rules of JSX. So the solution is to wrap it, let's say, in a div. So I put a div on this side, and then we take the closing div. Because the idea there should only be one parent element. Okay, there should only be one top level element. So the only thing at the top level of this is the div. And both the h2 and the h1 are inside the div. But now since I have so many elements, to make this clear, I want to wrap this in parentheses. So that way it's clear for Babel to know where my JSX begins and ends. And now it works. Hello world cheese. Okay, so you're starting to kind of see how this all kind of works. Okay. Neat. Now you can create multiple components. So let's try creating another component. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, when you're working in one file like this, you kind of want to build up. So the next component I'm going to build above here. So let's see here. We'll just do const hello world. Okay, equals props. Okay, and then that's going to return this JSX. Control X. Okay, and this instead is going to return the hello world component. See, I can just create another component. So see, that component came because it sees that this definition and sees that returns JSX, and it just kind of feeds into each other. So you're starting to see, like, we can create these large component trees. Okay, and that would still work. See, hello world cheese. Now maybe let's create another component. Let's do const g world equals props. Okay, and then this is going to just return an h1, but inside we're going to say props dot text. So what's that? What's props.text? Right now it's nothing. So if I go over here, well, right now we can't see anything yet. So what I want is I want to show this G world component next to hello world. But that's two top level elements, so I need to wrap those in a div. So I need to do this whole thing again. Because again, those are the rules of JSX. So now I see it, but I don't see this other element. Why? Because technically there is no props.text yet. How do I make props.text? I gotta pass in props. Props is short for properties. So they're properties of the tag. So I pass in a property called text, and it will equal goodbye world. And that property gets passed into this object called props. And see, now goodbye world shows up because I'm passing a prop. So props is one way to pass data from outside of the component. So a component can pass data to its children. So again, hello world and G world are both children of app, and it's able to pass data to them from props. There's no real way without doing some crazy stuff to pass data back up. Okay, the intention of Facebook is to pass data sort of in one direction, down the component tree. Okay, it's supposed to really sort of be functional programming. Data moves in one direction, and then that's it. And so once the data goes down, it doesn't come back up. There are ways to kind of work around that, but that's sort of what's the original intention. Okay, app document get element by ID. App, good. And then we'll show you one other thing. Let's show state. So state, let's see here, where would be a good place for state? Let's create another component. Okay. Const stuff will be the name of the component. Equals props. And this one's going to have to be a little bit more elaborate, so I'm going to use the curly brackets. And I want to create a variable that's internal. But it's an important variable. It affects what we see on the screen. So when that variable updates, I want the component to update. That means I want it to be part of my state. And how do I do that? Is I have to create a piece of state. So right now I'll just call it state. So const, and then you're going to use array destructuring, so state, and then you get a function called setState. So you have to kind of set it up this way. Equals react.useState. And then we put in the initial value, which will be cheese. Okay, so right now this variable called state equals cheese. Okay, but if I want to change it, I'm going to use this function to change it, setState, because that's going to trigger a re-render. So that way it just updates right away. So now let's do this. Let's return some JSX. We'll put a div to kind of be a parent of everything. And in this div, what I want is I want an h1 that's going to say the state. Okay, so whatever that variable is worth is state. It's in there. And then I want a button. And that button's going to say click me. Now, I want a function that when you click that button, it's going to change the value of the state. And then this should be lowercase state because it's the name of the variable. So we're going to create a variable, const handle click equals anything in particular. And all we're doing here is that when this function is run, we're going to say set state, and we're going to change it to the word to Gouda. The value of state is going to become Gouda. Okay? And that's going to automatically update what we see on the screen. So now what I want to do is make it when this button is clicked, so it'd be on click. That's another thing about JSX, is that properties need to be camel case. Equals handle click. So when this gets clicked on, cool. So that's the stuff component. So that's all in this stuff component. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this component to app. So was it called stuff? Yeah, stuff. So stuff. Okay, there's stuff, so it should show up at the bottom of our component. So there's cheese. And if I click me, see it changes to Gouda. Because what happens is that the state changed. If I refresh the page, it goes back to where it started. And this is where it becomes useful to download like the DevTools. So if I go over here to components, see I see that there's the app component. This is the React Dev Tools. You can download them as an extension to Chrome. Very useful. But in here I can see the different app components. So I can see app, and then I see in app there's 3 other components. Stuff, and I click on stuff, and I see stuff does have a piece of state called cheese. Now if I click me, see I see that it changes to Gouda. And when it changes to Gouda, it reflects the screen. Okay? So that's how state works. And the cool thing about it is that because I put the state on this component, the other components didn't change. Like if I go over here, we go to elements, right? And let's just break this all down. Okay. Like, take a look at what changes. Oh, I should have broke it down after I refreshed. Okay, notice only the cheese part will change when I click this button. See, only that changed. Because that's one of the things about React. It's what's called a shadow DOM, or a virtual DOM. And what it's doing is that it's constantly comparing, whenever state changes, it's creating a comparison where it compares the virtual DOM, the DOM that reflects all the data as the data is, versus what we have on the screen. And if it notices any differences, it only changes those parts, not the whole thing. It doesn't rebuild the whole website. It rebuilds that part. Okay, and that allows us to efficiently and quickly change things. That's why it's called React, because it reacts. You know, the alternative would be like using like something like jQuery, where you have to manually kind of think through all that logic. Here, you just manage the data, make sure that you use the set state function when the data changes, and then the component will rebuild itself with the new data. So it just kind of takes that part of the thinking out of the table. It does introduce some sort of new ways of thinking that take a while to get used to. Again, that whole unidirectional flow of data. But that's basically the main features of React. You're allowed to create components. You can pass data from outside into those components using props. And then you can have those components sort of render based on internal data using state. And there's a lot more, but this is, I think, a good start. So I'll see you guys later on. Have a great day and enjoy.